Welcome back. So today I just wanted to quickly go through the very small stack of books that I read in the month of May. So a couple of factors go into the reason why I wasn't at my best while reading in May. One of the factors being that I officially went back to work, and with that comes all of the stressors. It hasn't been the easiest transition in the entire world, to be perfectly honest. And besides just going back to work, it in and of itself has been particularly stressful lately. And on top of that, I also celebrated my birthday, and we kind of took the weekend and had some fun. So the first book I read was Lodestar, which is book number 5 in Keepers of the Lost City. I really enjoyed it. I feel like every single month I go over this series. It was great. The characters are growing, we're growing with them. It's really exciting and fun to see. Then, of course, I read the trilogy of the Hunger Games, book 1, 2, and 3, in anticipation of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, but I do have a dedicated review on this, so I'm not going to go on about it too much. You can go on over and check that out. I will leave the video link in the description down below. Next, we have, of course, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So I actually wound up going back to work the Tuesday after my birthday, so I was a little bit late getting into this. I think I didn't pick it up until the following weekend. I was going to do a dedicated live show, but just due to circumstance and everything happening, I don't want to take away from the current movement or platform. So I'm just going to very briefly talk about this. I think I rated this a 2.5 to 3 stars. It wasn't bad, it wasn't great, it wasn't necessarily what I thought it would be. So a couple of things I do like, because I want to be very transparent and say that it wasn't completely bad. So I enjoyed that they didn't use a very mustache twirly villain trope. I like that they showed you can become a villain in a different way than absolute tragedy striking or just being born plain evil. We see Snow transition just with his ambition, and he wants to be recognized, and he has a particular goal, and due to the circumstance of the world, there's very certain ways to get to his goal the easiest. And I thought that was very poignant. I thought, just like I think with a lot of Suzanne Collins writing, it was very current. It was very on trend with what should be talked about, especially with our current president. I think ambition and power, the dynamics that go with that and sometimes tie or tip the scales into villainy, is a very interesting theme, especially with recognition. The more that you exploit power and the more that you exploit means to gain power. We saw Snow was just recognized, and the means he took to get this power and the steps he took was just, there was positive reinforcement. And I thought that was a very interesting thing. A couple of things I didn't like. I thought the way in which the Hunger Games was handled, what really wasn't explored in the original trilogy. So it did just seem sort of after the fact. We gather that the Hunger Games has changed and transitioned enough that we know from Haymitch's time in playing the Hunger Games, which he participated in a quarter quell, up to Katniss's time, that of course there was changes and there was differences. Haymitch exploiting one of those changes that had to happen, which of course just was extremely interesting. That being said, because it's not explored a lot where the Hunger Games started, we just have that sort of briefing at the beginning, speaking of the history after the rebellion. I think a lot of us who really enjoy the story sort of have our own concrete ideas now, and to have them challenged is perfectly fine, but the way in which it was done, I think, was maybe just not the strongest way that it could have been done. We hop in, I believe it is 10 years after the rebellion and the first Hunger Games, and the beginning isn't really explored, and we see how much of an impact Snow has and all the changes he's enacting with the Hunger Games, which I think is super interesting. It shows very early on the sort of manipulation and the sort of slyness that he has, but also it speaks to his intelligence at a very young age, and I think that's great. Another problem I had with it was I found the lead heroine to be ridiculous. The song she sings comes off as incredibly, I know her name's Gray something. What is her name? Lucy Gray? Someone Gray? It is Lucy Gray. I found her to be almost irksome in the showmanship that she has. I really like the idea that she comes from almost a gypsy-like tribe, and that's really reflected. And it answers a bit of questions about how the districts became so enclosed and people were sort of trapped where they landed when the districts closed up. But the songs in which she sings, if you don't like my sass, you can kiss my ass. I think there can be a rebellious tone, but when the tone is so counter to the tone of the world and the story that we're in, it can lean towards more ridiculous. And that's really what I found with Lucy Gray's character before they introduced the lottery and everything with that and the bets, which again, I thought it was so interesting. Snow came up with these showman aspects because he is so aware of how people view him and how it affects what he is looking to gain. So though I didn't necessarily have a problem with Lucy Gray and him teaming up, and that's where she sort of explored all of that, the only kind of issue I had was it was very uncomfortable because it just didn't feel like it made sense. I felt like I was reading a script for a musical where people sing their emotions, and that's not really the tone you get throughout the rest of the book, but it was just specifically with her. So that was kind of an interesting takeaway to have. To be perfectly honest, it landed a little bit flat for me. It didn't explore some of the aspects I kind of wanted explored, but then again, it's not my story. I'm not the author. I think she had a point to make when she was writing this story. I think it was very reflective of U.S. politics. I think it was very poignant, but it fell short versus the first trilogy where I really enjoyed it because of the messages she had, along with the fact it was a really interesting story. I felt with this one, she had a point to make, but the story was sacrificed a little bit because of it. So maybe that's your thing. Maybe it doesn't affect you as much. As a reader, it's pretty important to me that the story can kind of hold its own with the message. And I just remembered, I also did cringe at the fact when I realized that Snow was being introduced as a mentor into these games early on. I was just praying that it wasn't a brazen girl from District 12, because so often what I enjoyed about Snow in the trilogy, especially very, very heavily in The Mockingjay, Snow was following his own compass. And that's what made him an interesting villain. It was very clear that Snow believed what he was doing was for the good of Panem. He believed what he was doing, and the Hunger Games and the way the districts were set up, he believed if society was to collapse in the way that Katniss knew it and the way that Snow had grown accustomed to, he believed that would bring about total destruction and basically the chaos of Panem. And that made him such an interesting villain, because you can understand how a villain gets to where they are when they're following their own compass in the direction they think is due north. Whereas when you add in this element of his past of a love affair with a brazen girl from District 12 who didn't really give a shit about the games, she didn't really think she was coming back, but she was going to be damned if she wasn't going to go down fighting, it made Snow and Katniss's interaction feel more personal. And I think I really enjoyed Snow as a villain because to him, Katniss was a chess piece. It wasn't personal. Much like his personality just reflects, he has an end game, and whoever he has to use to get there, he is willing to do that. So I thought it was a little contrary to really what I enjoyed about Snow's character, but I've seen some stuff online and people really enjoyed that Katniss was a reflection of Lucy Gray, but I just thought it sort of cheapened Snow's character a little bit. Next, we have our first DNF of 2020, I believe. This is Veronica Roth's Chosen One. A couple of things, I never just like to say a book is totally bad. Very rarely is a book totally bad. But a couple of things I liked about this. I like that it took the Chosen Ones trope and played with it. It's a very easy trope to just fall into and not challenge at all. So I really like that Veronica Roth challenged it. I like that she challenged the dark one trope. I like that she did a lot with it. I should also say, I got more than halfway. I think I was about 75% of the way through, if not a good 80% of the way through. I won't be continuing this series just because it fell flat for me. I ultimately wasn't interested in the characters and worlds, I should say, because I do want to keep this spoiler free. It wasn't for me ultimately, and I will probably be donating this. As I'm not going to keep reading the series, it just doesn't really make sense for this to stay on my shelf, and I do think this is a book for somebody. It just was not a book for me. Next we have Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. So this was fine. It was good. I know it is teen/young adult. It's my first Cassandra Clare. It will probably be my last Cassandra Clare. I found the writing a little bit cheap. I found it, the story very predictable and the characters very flat. That being said, I heard that a lot of people enjoy these books because of the angst and because of the romance and all of that good stuff, which I can appreciate, but that's not the type of reader I am. I do enjoy YA. I enjoy quite a bit of YA now. Previously, I would say in about 2018/19, I really didn't enjoy YA that much. And I had a friend that introduced me to the right stream that I was looking for, and I was just reading the wrong stuff. And unfortunately, this falls into the wrong stuff category for me. But I do think, again, this is for somebody, and it is a beautiful cover. And you know what? I also found it really disorienting because everybody was a James or a Will or a Edward. There's a lot of white guy names. And it was very disorienting because it's really hard to distinguish them from the others because their characters are almost caricatures. I just was like, oh, that's the drunk. Oh, that's the Mr. Hero. Oh, this is tall, dark, and handsome. Oh, it just wound up. I just gave them my own names, and that's never a good thing when I'm reading a book. That usually means I'm kind of stepping away from it. But then again, she doesn't focus on what I like. It's very angsty, it's very romance filled, and I am 27 years old, so I'm not really going into YA to read about 18-year-olds knocking each other's faces off. So, and then last, and probably my favorite read of this month, or maybe Catching Fire. Do you know what? I'm not going to say Catching Fire. I'm going to say Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I made a dedicated review of this. I really enjoyed it. Clearly, I had a lot to say about it. I read this entirely. I sat down. I read it all in a day. I loved it so much. I have a dedicated review, so I won't go on about it too much, but just know if you haven't read it and you've heard a lot about it, because that's the place I was in a few weeks ago, please pick it up. It's so good. It's not going to disappoint you. Please read it and then talk to me about it, because I want to talk to more people about it. It is now my life's mission, my year's mission. I can't dedicate my life to it, but it is my year's mission to get some people to read this book, because is it underrated? It's not underrated because a lot of people love it. I'm just being a narcissist. I think I went in with lower expectations because it was so hyped up. So I'm just being narcissistic. It's not underrated. It's very hyped actually. But what I'm trying to say is it is worth the hype. So please give it a go. So that is it for my May wrap up. Thank you so much for watching. I make videos every Wednesday and Saturday, and I will see you Saturday with a new video. Oh, my foot fell asleep.